Okay, so for one of my classes, I had to do a research study, and so I did it on physical activity in the classroom. And so what kind of got me thinking about this was basically the cycle that has started all of this is that the U.S. was underperforming on the academic stage in the world. And so because of that, there was changes that they wanted to make to try to get us to be more competitive on the world stage. So that was kind of led to the No Child Left Behind Act being passed in 2001. And so with that, there was a greater focus on rigor in schools, and that kind of led to physical activity time like PE and recess being cut from the school day. So, this is kind of what has led me to doing this study of seeing, we're still underperforming, we're still not, one of the top academic countries in the world, and so thinking, well, does this have something to do with it? Clearly, putting more emphasis on rigor has not helped, and I think there's been some other detrimental things that have happened because of that. So, the purpose of the study is to determine the effect of physical activity on student learning. So I had two research questions I was thinking about. The first one is, what relationship does physical activity have on increasing student performance and engagement in learning? And the second is, what types of physical activities are children most engaged in? So I found a bunch of resources and a bunch of literature that kind of was about this topic. And so one of them, it was an article called "Is the Physical Being Taken Out of Physical Education?" And it was also kind of talking about the effects of high-stakes testing and things like that. But one thing that they kind of talked about was with the No Child Left Behind Act, when that was passed in 2001, it was successful in bringing some students who were kind of being, I guess, forgotten about, and bringing more focus onto them and making sure that schools and districts were kind of giving them the support that they need. But focus was shifted away from like PE and recess in favor of the rigorous instruction. And specifically with regards to what subjects were assessed on standardized tests like reading and math. So it all kind of shifted to be towards standardized test focused. So another article that I read, it was called "Promoting Physical Activity in Elementary Schools." And so this kind of talked a lot about brain breaks and things like that in the class that you can do in the classroom, because we can't really control a lot of the amount of time they get for PE or the amount of time they get for recess, but we can control kind of what we do in the classroom. And so it was so interesting because it said that before the No Child Left Behind Act, students averaged 145 minutes of PE a week and 183 minutes of recess per week. But in 2007, which was 6 years after No Child Left Behind was passed, the numbers had decreased to 105 minutes of PE per week and 133 minutes of recess per week. So you can see that there's a major loss in the amount of recess time and PE time that kids are receiving each week, which breaks down into each day. So that was something that was very interesting to me, thinking like I was looking at the recess times, and it was 50 minutes less per week, so that's 10 minutes a day that they used to get of recess that they don't get anymore. So I thought that was really interesting. Another article I read was called "Overweight and Obesity," and so it was kind of talking about, this was from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and they were just kind of talking about how there's about 17% of children ages 6 to 11 years old are obese in the United States, which is incredibly high. And I chose this as a part of my literature review because that's, the ages that we work with is like 6 to 11 years old, and so thinking that there's a really high percentage of kids that are obese in there. And then there was something else in the Promoting Physical Activity in Elementary Schools article. And they were talking about, kind of along with the obesity thing, how there's many factors that tie into the obesity. It's not just because kids aren't getting enough physical activity. But one of the greatest ones is just inactivity. So thinking that, kids, a lot of times when they go home, they're playing video games, or, they're not getting out and being active. And a lot of times at school, they just will be sitting and doing work, and they're not being active at school either. And so it's not only a problem with obesity, but physical inactivity, it can lead to like cardiovascular and other health risks in kids that they might not have if they were more physically active. So for the study, ideally the participants for the study, it would have been like a random sampling of students in kindergarten, 3rd grade, 6th grade, 9th grade, and 12th grade. So it would have been kind of across all grade levels in schools. I would have had 2 classes from each grade level participate, so like one would have followed the physical activity procedure and one would not have. and 10 students would be randomly chosen from each class, so you could kind of compare at each grade level these 10 kids and these 10 kids. And it would have been a total of 100 participants, but realistically, I couldn't do that study unless I quit my job and, got a job at the district, or as a job as a researcher or something. So really, realistically, what happened is the participants in the study were the kids in my class. So there was 22 second graders that participated in that study. So ideally, it would have been different and it would have given a lot more information, but this is what, reality. So the first question is, what relationship does physical activity have on increasing student performance and engagement in learning? So this is, again, one of those things that would have been the ideal situation would have been that data would have been collected 1 week at a time throughout the year. So it would have happened, different points in the year. You would have had a whole week where you would keep track of the data. So if you were a class that if you were a class that's not doing the physical activity breaks, then you would have a whole week where you did not give any physical activity breaks for that week. Or the other class would, they would make sure that they are giving those breaks each week, at least two a day, in addition to recess and PE. And then the teacher would tally to keep track of how often students were off task or disengaged in learning. So off task, that would be if you have to remind them, hey, you need to get back to work. Or disengaged in learning could be if their head's down on the table, or if they're kind of staring off in space, or just they're not engaged in the work that they're doing. So just using kind of tally marks to do that. So then, ideally you would have had data from all of those different grade levels, and it would be interesting to see, kind of the difference between kindergarten, if getting the activity breaks and not getting the activity breaks, and 12th grade, to kind of see that difference. But realistically, I wasn't able to do that. So what I did is my students, we went one whole day without any physical activity breaks aside from recess. We didn't have PE that day, so they just had recess. And so I used tally marks, and I kept track of how often students were off task or how often they were disengaged in their learning. And then another day, they had 2 physical activity breaks throughout the day. And so I did the same thing. I tallied how many times they were off task or disengaged in learning during that day where they had those physical activity breaks. So the results were really interesting. So the day that they did not get any physical activity breaks, I tallied 21 times that they were off task or disengaged in learning. So that was 21 times that I had to, tell them, hey, let's get our work done, or that I had to kind of redirect them to get them back on task. And on the day when they did have the physical activity breaks, there were only 14 times throughout the day that I had to redirect them. So so that was interesting because it was clearly less. Doesn't mean that there wasn't any, there were still redirections that happened. I think that no amount of physical activity breaks would solve that, or, there's always going to be some kids who need to be redirected. But it was interesting to see that there was definitely less of redirections when they had the physical activity breaks. So for the next question, it was, what types of physical activities are children most engaged in? So what I did for this was I did a survey on Plickers, and I had the students do the survey on Plickers. And so they answered 2 questions on the survey. The first one was, after school, what are some of your favorite things to do? And the second was, what kind of Go Noodle videos is your favorite? I know in my class, we use Go Noodle as our kind of physical activity breaks. So I asked them those questions. So the first question, after school, what is your favorite thing to do? I actually was able to do it with my homeroom class and with my reading win class. So I was able to kind of get 2 different things of information. So it was interesting because the options were A, playing games outside with friends, B, playing sports, C, going to the park, or D, riding bikes. And in both cases, majority of students chose playing games outside with friends was their favorite of these activities to do. I intentionally did not put things like video games or watching TV on here because I wanted to see what kinds of physical activity they liked. So the second highest on there was playing sports. In both classes, there was only 1 student who liked going to the park and 3 students who would prefer riding their bike. So so it was very interesting to kind of see their results and to see that most of them like the playing games outside with friends. I also looked at the Plickers, and I was looking to see the playing sports, if there was any relationship between girls and boys wanting to play sports, and it was actually pretty split 50-50 with girls and boys preferring to play sports. So I thought that was interesting too. So it shows that it's not just the boys that want to play sports after school. They can do both. And so for the second question, I asked what kind of Go Noodle videos they liked the best. So the options were Blazer Fresh, which is, I don't know if you all know those are my favorite, but it's like the guys and they come up with these educational like raps almost and they dance along to them. And then there's Moose Tube, which is like the ones in the woods that have the silly chants and things. There's Kids Bop, and then there's like the music videos from like YouTube. And so in both cases, the majority of students preferred the music videos like on YouTube, which was interesting. It was interesting because a lot of those I feel like they're not as physically active. A lot of them it's more of kind of just like watching, which was very interesting to me. But then one class they liked Kids Bop the best, and then another one they liked Moose Tube the best. So it was interesting because there were lots of varying levels in both of them, though. Blazer Fresh was the least, which made me sad, but that's the one I always want to do. But it was really interesting. So basically, based on the results of the study and on the data, these are some of the conclusions that I came up with. So with the first research question, which was, does physical activity have effect on engagement and learning? I think it shows that it does have an effect on there. So students needed a third less redirections on the day that they received the physical activity than they did on the day that they did not receive the physical activity. And then based on the second question, what kind of things they prefer. They prefer to play outside with friends than to like engage in physical activity independently. So all of the other options on that kind of were things that they could do independently, like riding your bike or going to the park. They would obviously have to have an adult go with them, but even playing sports, sometimes you could do that independently. So it seemed like they would prefer to be able to do things with other people and with their friends, which I thought was interesting. And in the Go Noodle videos, they prefer the music videos that are from YouTube. And so kind of the reason that I infer that they like that is because that's something that's relevant to them. At home, they probably watch those videos on YouTube or, or things like that, because I know that YouTube's a big thing, and so I think they do a lot with that. So here are my references. So those are the articles that I got some of the literature reviews from. So that's my presentation. Thank you for watching.